you? Okay, let's unpack this. The crypto and tech worlds are buzzing, seriously buzzing, about a potential mega merger. Meta. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp might be eyeing Ripple Labs, the folks behind XRP. This rumor has definitely grabbed headlines, sparked a ton of debate.
It really has. I mean, the idea of a tech giant like Meta buying up a major blockchain player like Ripple, it's fascinating. It touches on some pretty fundamental shifts in digital finance and, the whole tech landscape.
Absolutely. So for you, our listener, maybe you want to get up to speed, but without getting totally bogged down. Our mission today is basically to dive deep into this rumor. We'll try to trace where it started, figure out what's solid info versus just, speculation, and really try to grasp what it could mean for digital finance down the line. We're pulling from recent news, expert takes, even some community chatter just to get you the key bits. Right. And a good place to start is probably, how did this whole thing even begin? Yeah. Our sources suggest the first, let's say, spark came from a post by a tech influencer, Amelie, on X. And then it seemed to pick up steam after an interview on the TechPath YouTube channel. That one featured Bradley Kimes, event director for XRP Las Vegas.
Right. And the interviewer there, Barrow, he didn't confirm anything directly, but he made a sharp point. He pointed out how Mark Zuckerberg at Meta seems interested again in stablecoins, those cryptos pegged to, the US dollar, and also interested in making cross-border payments smoother, which is, that's Ripple's whole playground, isn't it?
Exactly. And what's interesting is how Barrow linked that to Zuckerberg's own comments. Apparently, Zuckerberg was at a Stripe event, and he stressed how difficult, but also how potentially profitable global money transfers are. He even mentioned needing a scalable stablecoin to become sort of standard. That certainly sounds like it aligns with what Ripple's been building.
Yeah, it does.
I think the insight there might be Meta seeing the value in an existing network for payments, one that's already interacting with regulators, building that yourself. Even for Meta, it's a huge task.
Yeah.
It takes immense trust. Ripple's kind of already got a leg up there with institutions.
Totally. And Kimes, the guy from XRP Las Vegas, while he didn't confirm a deal, he definitely added some fuel to the fire, acknowledged the M&A trend in crypto. He actually said something like, whether it's Ripple or whether it's Meta targeting them, I see this as the moment where special things like this can take place.
Intriguing, yeah. But still, not confirmation.
Precisely. And that's the key thing to hammer home here. Despite all this noise, as of today, May 17th, 2025, neither Meta nor Ripple has put out any official word, no credible reports confirming actual talks. The silence is pretty telling.
It really is. You'd expect something official for a deal this huge, wouldn't you? So why keep quiet?
Well, there are actually quite a few good reasons for companies to stay mum during potential M&A talks. Market sensitivity is huge. Just a whisper can send stock prices or token prices flying.
Then there are regulatory hurdles. Announcing too early could mess up getting approvals later on. And let's be honest, a lot of these talks just fall through. Announcing early causes unnecessary confusion, market swings. Plus, our sources stress there are none of the usual regulatory filings you'd expect. The disclosures that normally happen with big corporate deals like this, that usually means talks are either super early or just not happening at all.
Okay, that makes sense. So rumor mill's working overtime, but officially, crickets. Okay, shifting gears a bit then, why would Meta even want to jump back into digital finance, especially after, the whole DM thing?
That's a really critical question. Meta's first try, DM, which used to be Libra, remember?
Oh, yeah.
That project ran into major regulatory walls.
Yeah.
Just couldn't get past them. And it was eventually shut down. That whole experience probably gave Meta a very direct and likely very expensive lesson in trying to break into crypto and deal with global finance rules.
A pricey education, for sure. So how does that failed attempt maybe shape what they're doing now?
It's pretty likely those DM struggles made Meta rethink its whole approach. Instead of trying to build everything from scratch again, maybe acquiring a company like Ripple looks, smarter. Ripple already has tech, partners, experience navigating regulations, even with its own legal issues. It could seem like a faster, maybe less risky way in.
That whole buy versus build thing makes sense. And haven't they been hiring people with relevant backgrounds too?
They have. Getting Ginger Baker as VP of Product at Meta was interesting. Her background, Stellar Foundation, Plaid, First Horizon. These are all big names in payments and blockchain.
Right.
It really signals Meta is serious about bringing that kind of expertise in-house. Suggests they're planning something in digital finance.
Okay, so Meta's interest seems plausible, shaped by past lessons and current hires. What about Ripple? What do they bring to the table? Why would Meta want them specifically?
Well, Ripple's carved out a pretty significant space in cross-border payments. That's mainly through RippleNet and using XRP. Their strategy has been very focused on institutions, offering ways to move money internationally faster and cheaper.
And Ripple hasn't just been sitting still either, have they? I feel like I've read about them making some big buys recently.
Exactly. Ripple's been actively growing through acquisitions. Buying Megako back in May 2023, that was a hefty $250 million deal, shows they're serious about digital asset custody and tokenization for their enterprise clients. And then they announced they're acquiring Standard Custody and Trust Company, another player in virtual asset custody, bolstering that side of the business.
Weren't there whispers of even bigger targets, too?
Yeah, unconfirmed reports, mind you, but talk of Ripple looking at Hidden Road, a prime brokerage firm, for maybe $1.25 billion. And also reports they made a huge $4 to $5 billion offer for Circle, the company behind the USDC stablecoin. That offer was apparently turned down.
Wow. Okay. That's serious money. Sounds like Ripple sees itself as a buyer, maybe more than a seller.
That's definitely the impression. These moves suggest Ripple wants to build out its own full suite of services, become a major infrastructure player. It points towards a company aiming for significant independent growth, not necessarily waiting to be bought.
Okay, so let's imagine for a second this deal did happen. What would the impact be? What are the upsides, the potential downsides?
Well, the synergy, on paper at least, looks pretty powerful. You take Meta's massive global user base, literally billions of people, and combine it with Ripple's payment tech. That could genuinely speed up how quickly digital currencies get adopted by regular people. It could totally reshape cross-border payments.
Sounds game-changing. But regulators. Surely a deal that big would attract a ton of attention, especially since Ripple's already dealing with the SEC and Meta has its own regulatory headaches. Would merging just make things worse?
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. A merger like that would face intense scrutiny. Intense. From regulators all over the world. Both companies have history with financial regulators, right? Yeah. Combining them would raise immediate red flags about antitrust, market competition, financial stability. Regulators would definitely want a very close look at market dominance and consumer protection issues.
And speaking of the SEC, we can't really talk about Ripple without getting into that lawsuit. How does that whole ongoing saga fit into this acquisition picture?
Yeah, the Ripple versus SEC case is a huge piece of the puzzle here. It's critical. The core issue is the SEC saying Ripple sold XRP as an unregistered security. That's been hanging over Ripple on XRP for a long time now.
And it's been quite a roller coaster, hasn't it? Some big rulings came out.
Definitely. Judge Torres' ruling back in 2023 was major. She decided Ripple's sales to institutions were securities deals, but the sales on public exchanges to regular people were not. That was seen as a big win for Ripple, at least partly.
But it didn't end there, right? Things have kept happening more recently.
Correct. Early this May 2025, there were reports Ripple might pay a $125 million penalty. Then later, word was the SEC suggested maybe only $50 million. But the really interesting bit was a joint filing. Ripple and the SEC together. The SEC apparently agreed to give back over $75 million held in escrow and asked the court to remove existing injunctions.
That sounded like they were getting really close to settling it, didn't it?
It really did seem that way. But it wasn't quite smooth sailing. One of the SEC commissioners, Caroline Crenshaw, actually dissented publicly. She argued settling like that was bad for investor protection, weakened the SEC against crypto overall. So clearly, not everyone, even within the SEC, was on board.
And then just now, another twist.
Yep. Very recently, a federal judge in New York actually rejected that joint motion for the settlement. Said there were procedural problems with how it was filed. Now, important point. This rejection doesn't change the earlier ruling about XRP not being a security for retail sales.
Oh, okay.
But it definitely throws more uncertainty onto the timeline and the exact terms of any final settlement. Still up in the air.
So this legal cloud is still hanging over Ripple. How does that uncertainty affect, their value? Does it make them less attractive for someone like Meta to buy?
It undeniably affects their valuation. That legal risk, the potential fines or restrictions, any potential buyer would look very closely at that. A clear win could boost Ripple's value massively, sure. But while it's still uncertain, it's a major hurdle, Meta would likely be very hesitant to buy a company in the middle of such a big legal fight without a clear end in sight. Though I guess you could also argue that despite the legal mess, Meta might still see value in Ripple's core tech and partnerships. It speaks to their underlying strength, perhaps.
Okay, so let's try and weigh all this up. The rumors kicking things off. The lack of official confirmation, Meta's possible reasons, Ripple's own strengths and moves, the tough regulatory climate. And this never-ending SEC case, what's the bottom line? How likely is this acquisition, really?
Well, financially, Ripple's value is a big question mark. We heard figures like $11 billion back in 2024, but Ripple's CEO said that's old news. More recent guesses for just the business side are maybe $15 billion, even up to $30 billion. And that doesn't even count the massive amount of XRP Ripple holds. So would Meta want just the business? Or the XRP too? Each option brings its own massive regulatory headaches.
And those specific regulatory hurdles, antitrust, finance rules?
Like we said, they'd be huge. In the US, in the EU, everywhere. Meta's already got antitrust issues. Buying a big fintech player like Ripple, that would ring all sorts of alarm bells about competition. Financial regulators would worry about payment systems, stablecoins, especially if Ripple launches its planned RLUSD, and just the overall stability of things.
So Meta tried building Diem, now maybe they'd buy Ripple. How do those strategies compare?
It's a really different approach. Diem's failure probably taught Meta how hard it is to break into finance directly, especially with regulators watching. Buying Ripple might seem like a shortcut, get the tech, get the network, but again, the regulatory obstacles for this kind of huge acquisition, especially with Meta's baggage and Ripple's lawsuit, they are significant. Plus, Meta seems really focused on AI right now. Maybe they prefer putting resources there, or maybe smaller partnerships rather than a giant risky acquisition like this.
And what about Ripple itself? They're buying companies left and right. Does that make them seem more like a buyer preparing for independence or maybe fattening up for a sale?
You know, their recent activity really points towards independence. Buying Medico, Standard Custody, sniffing around Hidden Road, trying to buy Circle. That looks like a company building its own empire, its own full-stack digital finance service. It suggests they'd set a very, very high bar for any buyout offer. It wouldn't just be about the money. It'd have to fit their whole long-term plan.
Have we seen other big tech companies buy crypto or fintech firms? Any lessons there?
Yeah, there are examples. Stripe bought Bridge, PayPal bought Honey. Those deals show it's complex. There are always regulatory reviews, challenges integrating the companies. Sometimes the value doesn't quite translate into the bigger firm. And honestly, a Meta Ripple deal, given the size and the profiles of both companies, it would likely be way more complicated than those previous examples.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's our final take on the Meta Ripple rumor?
Well, look, the idea is definitely exciting. It gets people talking.
Yeah.
But based on everything we can see right now, it really seems to be just speculation. There's no official confirmation. And the hurdles, regulatory, financial, legal, are just massive.
Right. So for you listening, the main thing is probably focus on what we know. Look at the real developments from both companies, watch the regulatory scene. Try not to get too carried away by rumors, however juicy they sound.
Exactly. And whether this specific deal happens or not, the underlying trend is important. Big tech and crypto are increasingly overlapping. That convergence is happening. It's worth thinking about what that means for innovation, for regulation moving forward.
That's a great point. It makes you wonder, maybe this rumor, even if it's just a rumor, is kind of a sign of that inevitable blend of social media, big tech, and decentralized finance, even if this isn't the deal that makes it happen. Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for diving deep with us today.